Welcome, everyone. I'm Catherine Lavender, the Data Project Manager for NACDA, and this is our NACDA Data on Aging podcast series. NACDA is the National Archive of Computerized Data on Aging at ICPSR at the University of Michigan, and we're funded by the National Institute on Aging. We seek out and preserve data relevant to gerontological research, kind of like a data library, curating the data as needed to promote effective research use. And we share the data with the research community at no cost. We are proud to say that we are one of the largest libraries of data on aging in the United States, offering opportunities for secondary analyses on major issues of scientific and policy relevance. We hope to connect with the gerontological research community using this podcast series and plan to highlight data resources and researchers, talk through data concerns, and learn the stories behind the projects. Find out more about NACDA and ICPSR by visiting nacda-aging.org.
Thank you for being here. We're welcoming Dr. Debra Umberson today. Debra is a professor of sociology and director of the Center on Aging and Population Sciences at the University of Texas at Austin. And she's also PI of the Health and Relationships Project, Study 37404 at ICPSR and NACDA. Her research is focused mostly on population health, aging in the life course, family, sexual and gender diversity, social ties and social isolation, and bereavement. And we're really looking forward to talking to you, Debra. Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Great. So let's jump into our questions and talk about how did you get involved with your research?
Well, this is really a long-standing interest because I've been interested in relationships and health pretty much from the beginning of my career and in looking at change over the life course. My early training was in gerontology, and then I actually got a master's in social work before I started graduate school in sociology. And even back then, I was interested in relationships and health. And I was probably because of that background in social work, I've also always been interested in merging qualitative and quantitative methods. And some of my early qualitative work is what got me into the project, the HARP project. So in that work on social ties and health, I've always had a special interest in family ties, both parent-child ties and marital relationships and intimate relationships. And I was especially interested in that because of the strongly gendered dynamics in relationships. So for many years, I was looking at gendered experiences of marriage and health. And probably about 15 years ago, I got really interested in looking at same-sex relationships to think about what those gender dynamics for marital and health experiences would mean. And so that's kind of how I got into the Health and Relationships Project to begin with.
Interesting. That's it's really, I wish I had time to ask more questions about the qualitative data that you've worked with. Most of our data is quantitative. And so we're always looking to improve our holdings and learn more about the best ways to share those kinds of data. But I don't want to get off subject. Please talk about your central objectives of your recent work.
So the main thing was really to dig deeply into those gendered marital and health dynamics, right? So, and we use this gender as relational theoretical perspective to kind of pull that together. So we wanted data that would allow us to test that. So we wanted dyadic data so that we could look at spouses in relation to each other. So we wanted same-sex and different-sex spouses. So that's kind of the first objective, was to get that gender as relational dyadic approach. So there's the dyadic data. We also had as an objective to look at daily fluctuation in relationship experiences, as well as sort of the standard survey experience. And so in doing that, we wanted to have daily diary data. So our daily diary data are also in NACDA, and they allow us to look at daily fluctuation over a 10-day period in the ways that spouses relate to each other and in their physical and mental health symptoms and their health habits. So we have that diary objective. And ultimately, I mean, we were just about completed our second wave of data collection is the longitudinal objective. So we are about to have our time 2 data complete. And then in a few years, we'll go back in to collect a third wave of data. So there's not much longitudinal data on same-sex couples. And so that's going to be our objective there.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much for your work. And we definitely are happy to host the data. And, you know, it's interesting. Yeah, I think I've only seen a couple studies come through that have included same-sex marriages, you know, intentionally. So yeah, that's really interesting.
Well, and you know, I mean, for different sex couples, we have phenomenal data. I think of it kind of as the gold standard for data. Through all kinds of data sets, you know, HRS and a million other data sets. In CHAP, we have a lot on, we have biological data, longitudinal data, dyadic data on different sex couples, but we just don't yet have enough data on same-sex couples to do comparisons of same-sex and different sex couples, or to look at same-sex couples over time, even on their own.
Right, right. So what were some of your major findings?
Well, I think across our studies, the thing that we're able to do with this gender as relational and dyadic approach is see that the gender dynamics in relationships are sometimes driven by the gender of your partner. So that, for example, we're more likely to want to control the health habits of male partners than female partners, even whether we're in a same-sex or different sex relationship. Sometimes our results are driven by gender of the respondent. So, for example, women are more likely than men to use sort of what I think of as stealth tactics to try to influence their partner's health habits, like, you know, just modifying their diet, or watering down alcohol, or just a million different ways, this sort of sneaky tactics of influencing a spouse. And again, that's true for same-sex and different sex dyads. And then there are results that are driven by the dyadic composition. Same-sex versus different sex couples are different. So, for example, different sex couples are much more likely to want to change each other's exercise habits than are same-sex couples. So that approach allows us to really see this much more nuanced approach to gender differences, and so that we can think of gender, not just gender differences within relationships, but sort of gender as relational.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That, you know, you may over time be able to tell what drives, whether it's the spouse or the partner making the health decisions for the most part, and what that's based on. Interesting. So can you talk about some of the challenges of the research process with these studies?
Yeah, and there are plenty of them.
Okay.
Yeah. So, well, one of the very first challenges, of course, is the data collection itself. And in recruiting people into this study, particularly, well, I would say particularly same-sex couples, but in the end, it was even more difficult for us to get the different sex couples than the same-sex couples. But it's very, you know, sexual minority populations are difficult to locate populations, in part because there are fewer of those people in the population to collect data from, but also because there's some hesitance on the part of the respondents to participate sometimes, because there's, you know, why are you collecting these data? There's the whole political element of it in terms of how the data might be misused. And that was a big issue for us, particularly early on. And then, of course, there are just all the challenges now of convincing people to participate in studies, period, the end. And then on top of all of that, we want both spouses in each relationship. So even if we can convince one person to participate, we have to have the other spouse participate for them to be in our sample. And that's, again, easier said than done. Usually it's one spouse much more interested than the other in doing it. And it's particularly difficult to get, it's more difficult to get men than women to participate, especially men married to women. So all of that, all of those challenges made it difficult in the data collection process. And then in the data analysis part, I mean, we feel like we have it down now with the cross-sectional HARP data, but at the beginning, it was very difficult for us. I mean, we're using these APIM models, right, that allow us to look at dyads, but we have same-sex couples, which are not distinguishable dyads in terms of gender. So there are methods, you know, that you can use with the APIM models to have non-distinguishable dyads, but we had to kind of get used to that. Now that we've got all that figured out, though, we have to figure out how to analyze the longitudinal data. And it's a lot, it's again, easier said than done, because we have longitudinal dyadic data with same-sex and different sex couples, and with the diary data embedded in the longitudinal data. So we have the micro-longitudinal diary data at 3 points in time, ultimately, that we have to figure out how to analyze.
Wow.
So, you know, I'm not a statistical person, really. So I'm relying on other people to help me figure out how to do that. But it's a real challenge to do it. I think for people who would like methodological challenges, it'll probably be a lot of fun.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I could imagine that. Oh, go on, Jim.
No, I was just going to say that that's fascinating. Years and years ago, when I worked for CDC and we were doing the family growth survey, that was one of the first attempts to interview spouses of the women respondents, and it was startling how little concurrence there was. It was as if the men were not married to these women, because their answers were completely at odds with what the female respondents were telling. And I don't know, is that still the case in your findings, or has it improved?
So I would say the same-sex couples are more concordant than the different sex couples are. But one of the things we're seeing already with the longitudinal data, and I will say, you know, even at time one, these are, we really wanted to capture the experiences of stable long-term relationships. So that's sort of like, you know, with the different sex couples, those are the couples who benefit the most in terms of health. So that's what we wanted, we were searching for. So these were couples who'd been together on average 15 years when we first interviewed them. So they should have been fairly concordant, but we're already seeing from the time one to time two, spouses across couple types become more concordant in their experience, in their reports.
That's good. Are they interviewed together or separately?
Separately, yeah.
Ah, okay. So you're getting, you know, fairly unbiased responses.
Very independent. Yeah, so we get, for example, some of the things you can look at are, we'll ask the respondent, how much did you try to influence your spouse's health habits today? And then we get the spouse's reports on what their health habits actually were that day. So there are all sorts of ways we could kind of pull them together to look at different research questions.
That's great.
Funny.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And the longitudinal aspects are really important, because the early stuff was all cross-sectional. So it was just a one shot and a fairly narrow age gap. So this is a fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I was curious if during the data collection, part of the resistance you get is the partners being worried about the other person seeing their responses.
So we didn't get many people expressing that. I mean, at the beginning, people often do ask, now this is confidential, right? So, I mean, sometimes people will clarify to make sure, but it's all of the data are collected online. So people, I think, feel more privacy that way. What we worried actually a bit more about was we wanted to make sure they were independent and not sitting down together to do their data input. Yeah.
Right. So, I know that you mentioned that, the nature for analyzing these data is difficult just because of all the different ways it's collected. And I'm curious, what advice would you give to other people trying to use the health and relationship study data, or those trying to work with longitudinal aging research in general?
Well, the first thing to work with the HARP data is I would just say, go look at our other papers, particularly the later ones, as we've really gotten it more figured out. And I think that our methods are pretty clearly laid out. And there's a great article that came out early on by Rhiannon Krieger and Dan Powers that are, I wish I could give you the citation to this article. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I think it's an analytical family demography or something like that, but it's how to analyze the HARP data or dyadic data with same-sex and different-sex couples.
Oh, very cool.
It's got code in it. I mean, it's really nicely lays out a how-to for the time one data. And right now I'm trying to convince them to write an article on how to analyze the longitudinal data. But I would say the best way, I mean, I always say, go look for the recipes, and the recipes are in the articles that have already been published. And for the longitudinal dyadic data, I mean, there are a lot of people out there that we've even consulted with, like Niall Bolger and other people who analyze these dyadic data. But so, there are kind of how-tos out there. But I definitely always think, go find other people who've used the data, no matter what the data set is, go get examples of how people have done a good job of doing that. And, look at the questionnaire, look in there. That's always great to look. You'll find your own ideas. And I would actually advise people to go to our qualitative studies, because they're loaded with ideas for quantitative analysis. So you can go in there and see what looks really interesting with the qualitative data, and it gives you a lot of ideas for analyzing the HARP data.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Often the advice that we receive from researchers is about reading the documentation and referring to other sources, and just advising people who might be new to the research process to network as well and connect with other researchers and statisticians. So I think that that's very valuable advice. I know that you mentioned that you weren't really into, you're not really like an expert in statistics, but I am curious, just jumping off from this point, that about what is your favorite statistical package when you are looking at data or analyzing data? What's your favorite?
So I just had a meeting with all of the people in my research lab, and they're all like, they're devoted to Stata, and some of them are devoted to R.
Yeah.
But for our longitudinal dyadic diary data, we're thinking we might need to use M+.
Oh, okay.
So, which is, half of our group is resistant to, because it's like, oh my God, we got to go somewhere new now. It's like, but so I can't really answer that question, because it's sort of in flux and it's changing with our longitudinal data, like, what the different packages have the capacity to do.
Sure. No, I think it's a good answer. Doing a good job requires the right tools, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'd also like to ask about if there are any conferences you generally like to recommend people to attend, or related to longitudinal data and aging and the life course, and just kind of people who are interested in similar research, meetings or committees or anything like that you would recommend.
Well, I mean, certainly for aging and longitudinal data, I always recommend the Gerontological Society of America, the GSA meeting. There's also a great conference, the SLLS, Society on Longitudinal and Life Course Studies, which is an international association. And if you study aging and longitudinal data, I think that's just massively productive meeting, and it's usually in a wonderful place. So that's one that some people might not know about that I would recommend. And you know, the Aging and Life Course section of the American Sociological Association, there's good networking to be done there, for especially for sociologists. For studying same-sex relationships and LGBTQ populations, I increasingly recommend PAA, the Population Association of America meetings. More and more sessions are devoted to sexual minority populations every year. And I think people on the cutting edge of research questions and data in the area are at that conference. So I strongly recommend PAA.
Thank you. Those are excellent suggestions. Yeah. I've heard other people talk that way about PAA. That's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So last question. What excites you about being a researcher now?
Well, I'm really excited about this idea of looking at how micro longitudinal data operate at different time points. So how like those daily fluctuations in your relationship dynamics look different 6 years later, 10 years later, 15 years later. I think it's just something we haven't really seen much in terms of data. So I think looking at that, not just in our own data, but to see other data sets emerge that do that, there are all sorts of questions you can ask that you can't really address with just straight up survey data. And the other thing I'm really excited about is the way that people think about gender is just changing. I mean, we look at it as a binary in HARP, really, you know, men married to men, men married to women. It's still a binary, even though we collect data on gender identity and gender conformity, which we do look at. But I think gender is interesting in a couple of ways, and sexuality as well. I mean, looking at sexuality, and we're now collecting qualitative data on people who identify as bisexual, who are in same-sex and different-sex relationships. So that gives us a whole new set of questions that we can answer. But also looking at gender as non-binary, like people who think of themselves as non-binary, and their partners. How do their partners identify? So I just think that the field is opening up, and particularly younger scholars are really moving the field forward. And I'm really anxious to see how that's going to unfold.
Yeah, that's really exciting.
Yeah.
I know, some of those populations have, you mentioned bisexual, they've been forced to sort of identify as one or the other, just in mainstream culture. And so that will be interesting to see how that evolves, how our understanding of that evolves.
And there is evidence that there are more health disparities associated with being bisexual within a same-sex or different sex relationship, compared to just identifying as heterosexual or not, right?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, so explaining that health disadvantage, like why is that? What's going on? And the same thing too for people who identify as trans, like, trans men and trans women. How does that unfold in terms of relationships and health?
Yeah. Deepen our understanding so that we can have better health and aging long-term for everyone. Yes, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today and for making the time. And we're very excited for the next wave of data. And yeah, thank you.
Coming soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to our guest and to our listeners for joining us on this podcast. You can find links to studies we referenced by viewing the description and content below. If you have questions or ideas, please email us at ICPSR-NACDA@
umish.edu.